Welcome to Ripstop on the Record, the podcast for makers, by makers, where we talk about all things MYOG. Brought to you by Ripstop by the Roll. I think it's good, right?
Yeah, I think that was a good take.
Hey, MYOGers, welcome back to Ripstop on the Record. I'm Jameson.
And I'm Avery.
In this episode, Carter and I are talking about 10 common construction mistakes. We've built this episode outline from curating hundreds of photos and even more questions sent in from other makers. The goal is that we're going to be able to help you avoid some of the same mistakes that we made or other people before you have made.
And before we get into it, we have a few new products. We have the tension lock light in colors, as well as a Fidlock V-buckle dual adjust 40 millimeter in all black.
Yeah, the tension lock light is awesome for a lot of things, but I think my favorite ways to use it is actually as a load lifter, especially with some of the cords that we have. The load distribution is more than enough through the cord, and then it just kind of is a nice ultralight, really streamlined look. Plus, you can use it on tents and shelters and other ways. And then the 40 mil Fidlock V-buckle, I'm just kind of obsessed with Fidlocks in general. It's kind of been one of my obsessions in the MYOG realm recently. So getting new magnetic stuff is always exciting. Another new product that we have is we've just released a new printable X-Pack. So this is pretty exciting for a lot of reasons, but mainly we've been out of stock of printable X-Pack for kind of a long time now. And this is a brand new material that we've worked with X-Pack to create just for Ripstop by the Roll customers. So RVX15 is sort of taking the best three features of other materials and then combining them into one material. So there's a reel on our Instagram that you should go check out. But the short story is that this is going to have the printability of V15, the durability of VX15, and the recycled face from RX15, all working now into this one material, RVX15, which is currently available. So if you're looking for printable X-Pack or printable pack cloth at all, go check it out.
And as always, please remember to like, comment, rate, review, share, and subscribe this podcast. Thank you.
Please. On to the pod. All right, so getting into the main part of the episode here, we're going to talk about 10, maybe 11, maybe a few more common construction mistakes. And Carter and I are going to use all of the information we have that our tiny little brains have stored away.
Speak for yourself on that.
To help you maybe, avoid them in the future. So Avery's going to run us through these questions and help move the episode along so we don't get too sidetracked with ferret-sized pouches and whatnot, so that we actually stay on track. So Avery, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. This is going to be a great episode for everyone listening, and we're going to get to the bottom of these mistakes and dispel some truths and some myths. So getting started, the first ones here, what are the most common construction mistakes?
Yeah. So we're going to lump 1 through 3 together, kind of like what Avery was just mentioning. The first couple go together, and they're going to these are not all quite this obvious. So stay tuned if the 1 through 3 don't impress you. We'll get to some juicy ones, but this needs to be said because these are kind of where they start. So Carter, I'll tee you up. Number 1 is not setting up your machine. Number 2 is wrong needle and thread. Number 3 is incorrect seam allowance.
Cool. Yeah. So the first two, you've got not setting up your machine and wrong needle and thread. I'm saying these together because to me, they are a part of your setup process. And we've talked about this, I don't know, a lot of episodes ago. So it's good to talk about it again. But for experienced sewists, or however you say that, everybody has a startup routine. And if you don't, you're probably having the problems that we're talking about. So that means whatever fabric you're using, you want to have your needle and thread, have a fresh needle set up. Make sure that the thread and needle go together, meaning they're not like one's tiny and one's massive. Sew on a piece of scrap so that you have the tension set up correctly. Make sure your machine's on, make sure your bobbin is full. All of these like kind of startup procedures that you need to do that will become second nature eventually. When you first start out, or if you're just really excited, you can skip that. And I can tell you, if you're sewing like a tarp and you get halfway through the ridge line and you ran out of bobbin thread, it's not a fun experience and it's completely avoidable. So definitely startup routine will help with things like forgetting to set up your machine. If you just always do it every time, remind yourself, you will avoid some mistakes you can't avoid, and you have to learn from those after. But this is one that you can eliminate a lot of headache by just taking a second before you begin.
Yeah, there's a PDF that we have on the website, and it's in a blog post and on other episodes where we have kind of this pre-sew checklist to go through. If you're really new and you want to know what those items should be, check the description down below for that PDF. It's free. You can just take it and kind of put it next to your sewing machine. But that checklist should become second nature. For people that are more experienced, or you have a situation that's really consistent, like the machine that I have here at work, I don't do that full checklist every time, because I know I was the last person to sew. Like if I'm coming in the next day and I know I was the very last person to sew the day before, I know where the bobbin is, I know where the needle is, stuff like that. So it's not like every time, every moment you sit down, you have to do this like lengthy process. It's just kind of like when it's the first time you're sitting down for a while, maybe somebody else used the machine, a new project where your material layers and whatnot are going to be different. That's kind of when you want to make sure you check those things.
Or if you just have a bad memory.
Or that.
There are just people out there that they could have sewn the day before, and maybe at the end of the day, they're like, oh man, I got to refill that bobbin tomorrow. Well, you sleep, you dream, you cry, whatever happens when you aren't sewing. And then you start again, and oh, that bobbin had 4 stitches left in it. And now I put holes in my DCF.
That is disappointing. Number 3, the incorrect seam allowance. This is a big one. I've been being a lot more strict with myself on this, on my patterns recently, making sure that I'm accounting for seam allowance, but also making sure I get that seam allowance correct in the final project. I have this propensity that I just always want to make it smaller. Like when I start sewing, I'm like, I probably got my math a little wrong. I'll just sew it tighter to the edge. And there's just no reason. That means I always have poor circumferential math, or my projects don't end up looking quite right. I don't have enough space to bind. I can't do relief cuts. There's a lot of problems that come when you don't use the correct seam allowance. Know what your seam allowance is and stick to it. Get one of the magnet things, draw a line on it. I don't know what you got to do, but whatever it is, just know what it is and actually use it. Trust the process.
Oh, so what you're talking about is like you've already added and designed the correct, like let's just say a standard 1/4 inch seam allowance into the pattern that you made, but then when you go to sew it, you're like, you know what, I was probably wrong.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like basically getting in your own head, right? Where
Yeah.
you're like, I probably didn't do that right. I probably didn't measure it right. But if you took the time to build a pattern and add seam allowance, just like you said, you got to trust that. If it's a technical issue where you're trying to use the 1/4 inch and you can't sew a straight line, you might just need to do some more practicing before you.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing too. It can be hard to like go around a curve, a 90-degree or less angle if you've never done that, and you might mess up and sew into the fabric and not into the seam allowance, and you might have to practice that a few times.
Sure. Dan McEwen, he was on the podcast a while ago. I can link that episode down below as well. He's a soft good developer. He had a really good tip in the episode that he was on, or one of them that he was on, where he said sew in layers. So like if you're going to be basting webbing loops on, and then you're going to be basting another material, like a liner material on, kind of work from the outside in, with the last stitch being the construction stitch. And that helped me. That's another reason why you'd want something like a 1/2 inch or a larger seam allowance, because then you can run your basting stitches at a 1/4 inch, and then run another basting stitch at 1/2 inch, or a bar tack or something like that. And then you can run your final stitch at 1/2 inch, or, you can kind of work from the outside in and kind of work these layers in, so you're getting everything, not just putting stitch over stitch over stitch. Because especially on something like DCF, you don't want to be putting 8 lines of stitching over one section, because it's just not going to hold.
And if you notice in definitely the more recent kit videos that were filmed by Jameson, a professional, and not me and Kyle, who are not professionals when it comes to videography, any of the newer, better kit videos, you'll notice this being applied without us even saying it. It's just like whenever we sit down to write the script and show you how to put something together, whenever let's say we're doing a zipper pouch and we're attaching the grosgrain little pull tabs, you'll notice that we tell you to sew it like as close to the fabric edge as possible. What we're really saying there is get it inside of the seam allowance and sew in layers, rather than take the grosgrain, flip it inside out, and just slide it in. We want you to baste it on there, because it's just another thing that's so much easier to do than trying to like hold it in place.
I saw something really interesting the other day, and I just wanted to share. I believe they were called something to the effect of seam allowance magnet guides that you put on scissors, and they were really teeny tiny magnets, and it was like 2 magnets is 1/4 of an inch, 4 magnets is 1/2 of an inch, so on and so forth. So you could build out, you could cut around a pattern piece without having to draw in your seam allowance, and you could just use these magnets as a guide. I don't know, I probably saw it flipping through Instagram. I did just do a little search, and I just searched like seam allowance magnet guide, and something came up, but I'll try to find the exact one I was looking for, and we can link it in the show notes. But does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I've never heard of that.
Okay.
I thought you were going to talk about like the ones that you can put on your sewing machine, but that's so cool. We have to get that now, I think.
Yeah, you put them on the, I mean, this is, I forgot that this is also a video. So the scissors can be magnetized. So they're just little teeny tiny round magnets that you put on the edge of the scissor. And then you would line it up with your pattern piece. So then you can just cut in your seam allowance while you're sewing.
That immediately makes me want to 3D print a part that snaps onto the top of the scissors that has.
Oh, that's a good challenge for
this
someone.
This feels like
somebody else make that so I can use it. I don't know how to model that, but
this feels like the perfect gadget to test in our next gadget episode with Matt.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if you guys know this, but it makes sense. You can now use AI to generate G code, which is the code that's used to like tell a 3D printer what to do. So you can just be like, if you don't know how to model like me and you're dumb, you can just be like, yo, I want a model of like a 6-pound dog playing volleyball, and then it just generates it, and you can just print it. We're becoming obsolete, but anyways, sorry to sidetrack.
Anyways,
cool.
we'll get back on topic here. So those were the first 3 that we just went over, and they're the most common. And then now we're going to get into the rest of the tips here and the mistakes. So these are going to be a little bit more lesser known, but you know, someone out there has probably encountered this. So let's start with the 4th one, neglecting material considerations.
Yeah, I guess I want to give a really quick preface before I get into this. All these materials that we carry are really strong and really great for applications where they excel and where they're supposed to be used. So if you hear me say like this material is not strong, it may not be if you want to use it for something that's not intended to be used. That may sound obvious when I say it like that, but it really can't be understated because you'd be surprised at what people use stuff for. But one of the most common failure points that you see are people using the wrong materials in the wrong place. They really like the color, they like the feel. Maybe they just don't know yet. They're just maybe a little bit green in MYOG, and they end up putting something like 22-hex-70 as the main anchor point on a heavy-duty backpack. And you're like, hey, this is an awesome material for a double-wide hammock, but it's not really what you want to put 60 pounds in on your back for many hours. So choosing the right materials. A couple like of the big highlights for people on these is a woven material is fantastic for like really strong anchor points. For example, my favorite material right now, it is new and it is something that we make. So if this sounds salesy, I am sorry, but I like this material and I would purchase this myself. But using stuff like the 210 Gridstop Venom Eco is the ideal material for things like shoulder strap anchors, hip belt anchors, back panels, stuff like that. The X packs, the kind of a material that has a woven face and back, I really like to use for like these really, really strong anchor points. Whether it's Gridstop or not doesn't matter exactly, but I personally really like something that's going to have a woven front and back for those like strong anchor points.
I think about this. You touched on obviously the fabric thing. This is also kind of before you, like the first 2 that we talked about. This is before you start. It's kind of before you even check to see if your sewing machine. It's definitely before you even look at your bobbin, right? This is like in the design phase. So it's what I thought of was actually components and narrow goods specifically.
Yeah.
I see this a lot. Let's say that you're making a backpack, right? And so you have some 1-inch wide grow grain. Well, I really like our grow grain. It's mil spec. It's super nice. It's very high quality. If you have ever bought grow grain on Amazon and compared it, then you can tell the difference between a high quality one.
It's like the good stuff and the cheaper grow grain. If you don't know the example, just imagine like porta potty toilet paper and like 3-ply. That's That's the difference we're talking about here.
And to be fair, there's going to be someone out there that's like, well, I actually like the Amazon one because it's
That's fair.
more fluid and it goes around. I'm just talking about like like pull tab applications, not binding tapes, because
Yes,
those have
yeah.
different characteristics. But anyways, I've seen this where someone is like, man, my backpack buckle, like my backpack strap won't work. And it's because they've used grosgrain instead of a webbing that's designed to be used with friction buckles.
Yeah.
Or on the opposite end, you use 3,000-pound webbing for where grosgrain should be. Especially if you're just starting out, you might not even get the difference between that. You're like,
Sure.
oh, webbing.
They're
You
all
just
1
use,
inch. What does it matter?
yeah, well, and most people would just say webbing. So you're like, okay,
Yeah.
I went on a website, I bought webbing, and now my small little pouch is like there's these massive wings on the side of it of narrow goods. So it doesn't just have to be fabric. It's this
Yeah.
If you're making something that's not just for sport and you're intentionally trying to make something that you want to use or give to someone else or whatever, intentionality in the planning phase is something that we all probably try to avoid, but you really shouldn't.
Yeah, that's a good point. That makes me think of cordage too, like getting a cord that's too narrow for the fitting and having it not really catch on the cord lock or the hook or something. Yeah, it's not just about materials, but that's a big one. I think you guys get the point there, but like make sure you're really using the correct material in the right place. This is something that I would say we excel in. If you message us right now and say, hey, what material should I use for this project? Chances are Carter's going to answer that for you. Potentially Justin would answer that as well. And these people are applications experts, I think I would feel confident in saying. So if you need to double check, feel free, but also at the bottom of every description of every product page, it says what it's designed for, and then you can feel really confident about what you're making with it.
Yeah, and also there are people that ask me stuff and I think I know a lot about it, and then I'm like, you're doing what now? It's like a refrigeration unit for Siberian Huskies. I have no idea.
Sounds adorable.
So I start using Google and try to use what knowledge I have to think of something that's a comparable product. But we hear lots of random stuff like that.
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks for sharing those. I think there's some little golden nuggets in there. I know that I have definitely made that mistake with cordage, putting the wrong size cord and the wrong size tensioner. So we've all been there. Just take your time, but also don't be paralyzed in fear that you don't know what material to choose as well. I think some people are on the other end of that as well, where they have paralysis analysis, where is that what it's called? Analysis paralysis.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Anyways, we'll move on to the next one. What do we have up, Carter, for the next lesser known?
Number 5, leaving a raw edge. This one, maybe it's a little bit lesser known, but I can tell you that Jameson and I, anytime we see like a bag at a store or a new cottage company, we see something at Trail Days or somewhere, we turn the bag inside out and we look at it, and you would be shocked at how many raw edges there are. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. There are some reasons why, maybe because of where the seam is, it's going to be really hard to cover it. But in general, that is also a part of your planning whenever you're creating patterns, is to think about the order of operations in which you will cover those seams. Raw edges can be not that big of a deal. If you're using like a laminate or something, it's probably not the end of the world. It's not going to fray. But typically when I see raw edges, I also worry about the construction of the seam and like how much intention went to designing the pattern, because a simple seam is not that strong for a backpack that's going to carry 40 pounds. It maybe will be fine. But when I see stuff like that, it scares me, and the same thing goes for making it yourself. So to avoid leaving raw edges, I think you just need to think about that this is hard. This is definitely an acquired thing. When you're just trying to lay down a straight stitch and make sure you have the right needle, you're probably not going to be able to reverse engineer in your mind how, like, oh, I need to bind this part before I sew on this, or I won't be able to get to it anymore. That will just come with experience. But once you understand that, it is important to think about, because I've done this plenty of times, right? Maybe you're making something that's a tube shape, right? Let's just say like a tent pole pouch. So you have a long, deep tube,
Just long cylinder.
long
type
cylinder,
project, yeah.
and then you finish it, and you're like, oh, I forgot to get the bottom. All
Yeah.
right, it can be tough to like, especially if you've now sewn like shoulder straps or something onto it, or like let's say you put you put a logo in the middle of the bag, right? Well, now you have to like try to avoid that to go back and finish those edges, and it can just be really difficult. I'm sure you have plenty of experience with this, Jameson, because you just be making.
No, never. Big time. Yeah, I would say for me, one of the things about raw edge. This is an opinion. I don't want to make it seem as if if you see this at REI or at a cottage company, don't call them out because they've likely made this decision intentionally.
Sure.
But personally, I see a raw edge as just being a little bit unprofessional. Like for me, I guess it's a pride thing where I want somebody to flip it inside out and be like, oh yes, they've taken every stitch intentionally and designed intentionally and like really gone about this in a really professional manner. So whether that's binding it, whether that's serging it and then top stitching it, whether that's doing a French seam, taping it, whatever it is, I want every like on like a really like a project I'm really working hard on and taking really seriously. Like I want that to be every edge to be finished. One other thing, I hate doing really complex seams. Like I don't love the French seam, the French felt. They have their place. They're really important. I just don't enjoy doing them. And for me, the way that I kind of avoid that is by binding and top stitching, or top stitching then taping. The reason that those techniques work really well is that you're distributing the load across more of the material instead of just over those holes that you put in the material. So especially if you're working with a laminate, you don't want all the pressure to be just on those holes. If you simply, like, I challenge you to do this. If you have a little bit of scrap DCF or a little bit of a laminate material, sew it straight stitch, don't finish it, and start pulling on it. You will watch the seam elongation happen, tape it. It is ridiculous how much stronger it gets when you tape it, or if you bind and top stitch it. It's really, really impressive with how much stronger it is when you do that. It doesn't feel like much. Maybe sometimes it feels like you're putting more holes in the material if you bind it, but it's doing so much for the durability. And I also just think it makes the user experience more enjoyable when it's bound, because it looks professional, tidies it up. You don't see fraying and stuff. Like if you're working in and out of your pack and your pack's fraying, it doesn't give me good vibes if I see like just seams fraying on the inside of my bag when I'm looking at it every day.
Let's get to the next point here. I think this one is interesting. It sounds like, I don't know, a funky parking move or something that you would find. It doesn't sound like you're talking about sewing in this, but yeah, what do we have? Zipper contact points.
Yeah. Okay. So I put this one because I've just been playing with this. If you've been listening to the recent episodes, you know about this wax canvas stuff tote bag I made for my wife. And one thing I would change about this is the way I design the top zipper is just not sturdy. Like I know right now that the zipper is going to be the failure point eventually. I'm going to have to seam rip some stuff and fix it. So that's why I put this in there, because I've seen this happen. So if you're going to do an embedded zipper, like a zipper where maybe it's similar to a welted pocket, or where you're going to kind of like cut the small rectangle out and do the flaps and kind of stitch it in that way, where you're not sewing like two parallel panels together like you would on many, like on a CPP. If you're going to do something like that, then it's really important. These are the zipper contact points. So think about a zipper this way. If you unzip it, and there's a kind of a stopper at the bottom, when you pull that bag open or something, you are putting a ton of stress on that bottom part, like where the teeth come together or where the zipper slider is. That contact point is what I'm talking about. It's adding reinforcement there and more kind of a robust design element there. This is one reason why people add zipper garages, because a zipper garage is adding more material. It's distributing the weight across, or distributing the load across the material that's kind of over the zipper flap there, instead of just on the one stitch that's connecting the zipper pieces together. I know this stuff is a little bit nebulous to picture in your head, but I'm talking about kind of when you unzip it, and when you unzip an item or a pocket and it's open entirely, when you're stretching that pocket out or pulling it open, it's kind of on either end where you're putting all that load. Those are important pieces to keep in mind, because those will wear out very, very quickly depending on how often you use that place on the bag, or how often you use the bag in general. But this is why you want to do zipper garages, why you want to add additional materials there to reinforce that. It's why you want to add zipper slider pull, or zipper tabs like grosgrain and stuff in there, because you can add you're putting a bar tack or some reinforcement there to help that area not be a failure point down the road.
I think another kind of adjacent to that is treating your zipper tape like it is part of the fabric.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, for the most part, when you're doing a finished zipper, you're sewing it down and then you're flipping it the other way and then top stitching it. What you're doing there is creating seam. You're creating a seam. You're creating like what the difference between your needle position in the first stitch and then the top stitch is your seam allowance.
Yeah.
So I see this often, and I think people do it because they are trying to expose more of the zipper, especially a waterproof zipper, because it looks cool. But what you're doing is basically putting all of the stress of the whole bag on, like, sometimes I see like 1/16 of the fabric,
Yeah.
right? So if you sew down the zipper and you sew on the edge, close to the edge of the zipper and close to the edge of the fabric, and then you flip it right side out and sew close to the edge of the zipper and close to the edge of the fabric, you're just working with a tiny amount of material, and that is going to be a weak point.
Yeah,
It'll probably be okay if you're using something strong, but
that's basically like a 1/16 seam allowance all of a sudden.
yes,
Which nobody does that intentionally, Like,
right. Well, and I think it's because you're just, of course, all of these are common stuff that can go wrong.
Yeah.
That's just another one of those things where you're rushing, or you didn't think about it, or you just don't know yet.
Yeah.
Any of those could be that, but that's another one of those things where you're like, all right, I'm going to use a zipper foot here, and then I'm going to switch to another foot so that my spacing is about 1/4 of an inch or whatever I want it to be.
Yeah.
Great. The next one, number 7, we have here, not double backing.
Oh,
Again, another tricky one there.
This
What does
also
it
sounds like
mean?
another car. Jameson just wrote down car maneuvers for some reason. He's been watching Jason
Yeah.
Statham movies.
watching the Fast series.
So, well, I was going to steal this one,
Oh, okay.
and
I
I'll
was
tell you.
excited about it though.
Okay, I'll let you talk about it. I'm going to actually combine 7 and 8 because they're going to segue into each other.
Yeah.
But Jameson is actually excited about this one more than I am, so you go ahead then.
Okay, thank you. All right, double backing. I think there are other words for this in the maybe more orthodox sewing world, but what I'm talking about here is that if you're going to do, you're going to lay down a daisy chain with our bumpy webbing. I personally, unless it's going to be a material likely over 500D, I'm going to put a layer of material behind the material and behind the webbing to double back it. So you're basically putting 2 layers of fabric under whatever your reinforcement area is. For me, what constitutes double backing is when I'm going to be doing some version of a bar tack. For me, because we don't have a bar tack machine here, it's a DIY bar tack. So I'm just going to go back and forth anywhere from 3 to 5 times, depending on the material and the project. But that's what I mean by double backing. I use scrap materials for double backing almost always because you're typically not going to see it. Not to mention they're not normally very big. So I always hold on to scraps, kind of anything bigger than 2 inches by 2 inches. I'm going to hold on to that stuff because then you can kind of lay it back behind your bar tack. But for me, I do this even on laminates. Like I was making a DCF pack a couple weeks ago. I use these scraps for the daisy chain exactly. Then I taped over it. Pretty much any project that I'm making, I'm going to do where there's going to be a bar tack, I'm going to put a small reinforcement patch behind the face of the material just to make sure that it's grabbing onto something else.
Yeah. So yeah, small reinforcement material is for people that speak normally. Double backing is for Jameson. If you didn't know what he meant by double backing, anyway, just teasing. When I first read that, I was like, double backing? What is that?
Patches that you sew onto, I guess. Patches, maybe.
Yeah, this is a great one, and I think this is certainly a kind of a more of an expert thing to be doing, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's why we're talking about it. Is, hey, just think about how many stitches you're putting into something and where it's going to be on your project. If you think that those stitches might pull out because it's the part of the bag where you open and close it every day, consider reinforcing that area. And like Jameson said, all that really means is just put a reinforcement patch before you start sewing.
Yeah.
That's it. For DCF or laminates, it could be that you're putting a reinforcement patch in the form of a single-sided tape, like the DCF repair tape.
Yeah.
You can lay that down, and that gives you some extra reinforcement behind it so that you don't have any failures.
Yeah.
To go along with that, number 8 is pour bar tacks. So we'll kind of loop these together because we're really saying backing and bar tack and back a lot. So I think that this is another one that happens a lot at the beginning of your sewing time for the most part.
This was me a couple years ago.
And the reason for this is totally makes sense. And I did that. I did this too. Putting like 70 layers of stitching on a single spot, because in your head you're like, oh, I'm like making this thing strong. I'm making this super durable. I need to make sure this never. What is the thing like that dads do after they use ratchet straps? Oh yeah, they like hit. They hit the side of the truck. Yeah, that ain't going nowhere. That's what you're doing, and it's just the fear because there's inexperience or you're not sure how it's going to work out. Totally get it, but try not to do this because what you're doing is making it
weaker
for the most part, depending on the material, right? If you do this on 1000D Cordura and a piece of thick webbing, I think it's not gonna really matter. But let's say you're making a pillow or a quilt and you're using a 10 denier fabric or 15 or even 20D, and you're like, oh, I'm putting in this grow grain like little tab so that I can have. I don't know why I said grow grain. I said grow grain in slow motion. Right? It's like the movie Click with Adam Sandler. Anyways, so of course you didn't see it. You're homeschooled. So
stop telling them that.
So he wasn't homeschooled. Well, no, yeah, you were. Anyways, you have this quilt material. It's light. It's beautiful, and you're gonna put some snaps in it, right? So you can snap it up behind your back. In your head, you think, oh, I really don't want this to come loose and for like the down to come out. So I'm going to rev up the engine and do 8 layers of bar tacking. That's going to rip out now. And it wasn't going to beforehand. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I know that people want to, all of our goals are to have fun and make something usable and be proud of what you make. So sometimes, you're making it for your grandma. You're making your grandma a hammock and you're like, I really don't want grandma to fall out of those trees, right? So you think that you should put 90 layers of stitching, but that's in most cases, grandma's going to fall now.
My rule of thumb is pretty much 3 to 5 back and forths is pretty much always what I do. And that's kind of a scale of lighter materials are going to be on the 2.5 to 3 side of things. If I'm doing something like X50 Tactical or 1000D Cordura, then it's probably going to be something like a 5 bar tack kind of thing, just because I'm not as concerned. But that's roughly what I'm doing. Just if that helps give you an idea of how many back and forths. I hate to admit it, but I'm sure other people feel this way too. Definitely had projects where I did 10 where I'm like, oh, this thing's really not going to
grandma fall is what you're saying.
Just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Like I really want to take my construction seriously, not realizing that there's basically no benefit after probably about 5.
You also probably sewed through all of the material that was there.
Yeah.
Like most of it. And now it's just being held on only by like the actual sewing thread.
Yeah.
But another way that you can do this, another creative way, is what I do often. Instead of doing it, like, for instance, let's just say you're making a hammock tree strap. A lot of people, this is a spot where you're like, I don't want to fall. So you do 47 bar tacks in a row and you have 470 bar tacks or whatever. I actually just do like a regular back and forth and then use like a box stitch or another stitch that disperses the load like across a larger section of the webbing. I don't know if I can find this graphic, but there are some interesting things that happen with physics when you have different stitches. They're actually, they test this in climbing rated stuff where something like a W stitch is what I call it, where you kind of have like a small like back and forth and then like basically what looks like squiggles is like way stronger than just doing 3 heavy bar tacks. So it's an interesting thing. So depending on what you're doing, maybe consider just doing like an X stitch or a box or something like that instead of, if you're worried about it coming off, instead of putting down the jackhammer on the.
My DIY homework for you all is 2 things. One, you learn a lot about bar tacks if you watch a bar tack. Like watch a slow-mo bar tack thing. There's not as many stitches as you would think, and bar tacks actually do. The way the bar tack works is that it's really small zigzags going back and forth. And it's a microscopic version of a W stitch that Carter's talking about. But then so like watch a bar tack, that'll kind of show you how bar tacks really work, and it'll help give you understanding, like, oh, it's not just a million stitches. There's a tactic to this, but then also learning those stitches that Carter's talking about, knowing the box X stitch, learning the W stitch. I've done X stitches. It's a little bit aesthetic, but it's also kind of like a W with an X grid. There are different ways that you can do these reinforcement stitches that help improve that, to kind of wrap up number 8 at least.
Right on. So the next one we have here, number 9, we'll get into, is about ignoring grain lines.
This is your place because I have messed this up, unfortunately, recently.
Okay, so what we're talking about here is understanding how your fabric moves, right? What does your fabric do when you pull it on the diagonal? What does it do whenever you pull it across the horizontal and the vertical? Understanding these things allows you to pattern correctly, and it also can allow you to choose the correct sewing technique. I see this very often, and for the most part, like most of these, it's going to be okay, right? We're not saying if you don't fix this about yourself because you just want to sew for fun, then you're bad. That's not what I mean. But I see this a lot, and people don't actually realize they're doing it. So a great example of this is using like a stretch woven, like our Venom stretch fabric. It has 4-way stretch, but there is one direction that it stretches a little bit more than the other. So if you want the pocket to expand out more, then you want to turn it in the direction that gives you more stretch. If you don't do this, then your pocket will still be stretchy, but you might be like a little bit disappointed and be like, man, I thought this was supposed to be a stretchy fabric. And this is just due to the nature of how stretch wovens are woven. So test that before you get started, and make sure you have it oriented the right way. If you're making a pattern, then you can draw the grain lines in, which are basically just arrows that show you which way you should put the pattern piece on the fabric before you cut it. Same goes for the diagonal. For any woven material, you're going to have bias stretch. The bias is just the diagonal. Some materials will have more than others. So if you are trying to make a piece, I'm trying to think of a piece of clothing.
Alpha Direct.
Yeah, you're trying to make a piece of clothing and you're trying to use as little material as possible. That's what you should do. Like, save money and be thrifty. But understand that for some pieces you won't be able to do that, because you might need a piece of the shirt to stay static and not stretch. But if you turn your pattern piece diagonally to try to fit it in there and not use just a yard, you're gonna have like everything looks great, and then like at your armpit there's just like this stretchy bit of like fabric hanging down, and you don't want that.
I mentioned alpha because that's exactly what I did. I was trying to maximize the amount of material that I used, so I like nested all of the pattern pieces together, and it just like it basically what happened is that it's the alpha raglan hoodie, and those seams that go down kind of your shoulders, the raglan seams, they're now just like little holes, like 1-inch holes on that seam, because I didn't get the stretch the right way. So like on my back, I think I like put like slung a backpack over my shoulder, like that seam got really tight because there wasn't the correct stretch. Like I cut it on the bias or something instead of the other way. So that's just, it's not a big deal. Like I still wear that hoodie all the time. It's just 2 little holes on either seam, but I got a hole in my hoodie because I didn't get it right. That was the result.
Yeah, and this could happen to anyone. I think this is something that you could do while you're designing and you're just in the moment and you're not thinking about it, or maybe you're using a material for the first time. And yeah, I've definitely done this on backpack pockets. Actually, inside scoop, the beanie kit that I designed, when I designed this, of course, I actually did pay attention to the grain line, and I like put that into our tech pack that then goes down to the cutting department, and they were cutting samples for me so I could sew them up and make sure that pattern was good to go, so that when you got it, it would work. Well, I got a few of them and I didn't think anything of it, and I just made it, and I tried to put it on my head, and I was like, dude, do I have some like big head disease now, and like my head's grown like the Grinch's heart?
You got cerebral edema at sea level.
Dude, it scared me at first, and then I realized, oh, they accident to try to like optimize the cut. The operator had, I mean, they didn't know. They rotated the pattern on the fleece, and the way that they rotated was the vertical, which had less stretch. So even us, even professionals, that this can happen. This is a common thing.
Yep.
But yeah, if you do that, it will not feel good on your head.
Yeah.
All right. The last one here, the final.
It's the final countdown.
There we go. That's what we needed. The final common construction mistake right here is incorrect load distribution.
So many of these. Were you watching like a trucking show when you wrote these? It's always like incorrect load distribution and double backing.
What you got to do is make sure the van is equally weighted on both sides, doesn't tip over.
Oh, that makes me miss Isaac. He'd be talking about his payload on his truck.
The caravan.
Anyways, incorrect load distribution. So we've kind of covered this in a few of the other ones, but ultimately what this means to me is, again, intentionally thinking about where the high load points are going to be. The most simple one is one that we've already used, which is backpack straps, right? Everything that's in your backpack is being held up and held onto your body by those straps. So at the point where the straps attach to your pack, if you look at almost any backpack, you'll notice this. There are little triangular wings. And what the reason for this is that when you have that triangle embedded into a larger part of the seam on your bag, it can distribute the load in a linear fashion and in a larger fashion. So imagine, and I've done this trying to save weight before, if you just put a piece of grow grain in there and sew it, over time that will rip out, depending on the material and depending on if you don't follow step number 8 and you do 7,000 bar tacks in it, it might also pull out. But yeah, so just this comes with experience for sure. Or if you're like me and you're trying to experiment, just think about how is this product going to be used for this hammock? Where is all the weight? Where is the tension going to come from? If it's weight bearing, where are the lines of force going to be? And think about your seams in relation to that. What else you got, James?
I think about fanny pack wings. I mean, it's basically the same concept as backpack wings, but that's like where I think of load distribution a lot, just because it's the only point of contact. A backpack you'll have where it connects at your shoulder and where it connects at your hip, but for fanny packs, the wings are the only place that it connects. So what I always try to do is just like double the width of whatever the webbing would be. That's sort of my imaginary rule of thumb for like when I'm creating wings. I'm like, okay, if I would embed 1-inch webbing, how can I distribute this over 2 or 3 inches of over seam here? Or what that normally means is that I end up making a lot of funky looking wings for different projects. When I was making my climbing bag, I really wanted to make sure that everything was distributed appropriately. So I sewed bumpy webbing into these like really specific kind of tapered wings. And there's like 6 of them all over the pack. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, it's just really imagining how you take whatever you would be embedding in the seam, just doubling or tripling that to make sure that it's not, because what you're looking at is moving it across more stitches. If you put 5/8 inch bumpy webbing into a seam, you're only likely getting upwards 3 to 4 stitches in that over that bar tack or over that seam. So if you can move that across 12 stitches, then you do the math. That's a much better ratio for durability.
And I'm also sure that real like designer peoples, the smart humans, smart humans out there, and probably DIYers that are just like engineers and actually know stuff. And I'm sure that there is actually a load distribution like formula that you are supposed to use. But what Jameson's talking about is an example of when you're making stuff, you just learn, and he's learned that works. So Avery mentioned analysis paralysis earlier, and I think this is another spot where you could get to that and be like, well, what if it tears? I need to like do some super crazy math and look this up. It's like, no, just try your best to think about it, and then hey, just make it a little bit bigger than you would, and then learn from that. If after carrying your backpack for 3 years, you see that there's a lot of stress on that point, then okay, maybe I need to do make it bigger next time. Or what I did is look at backpacks from companies that you respect or are highly regarded, because especially for big box stores, for the most part, they are putting all that R&D into that, because they obviously can't have product failures, and they have to consider people that might be super rough on their gear or not know how to use the gear properly. So if you look at what they do, you can learn a lot and emulate that.
Yeah. All right, Avery, take us to the last section here.
All right. The last section we have is user questions. So what I can do is just read them. And I guess you guys can just react, comment, relate, whatever you want to these. So thanks for everyone who sent in a question or in a common construction mistake. The first one we have here is from Area 45, and they said, measuring a gusset length incorrectly, always too short.
This is the bane of my existence.
I was just about to say, this is what happens whenever you don't prototype.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm not trying to say, oh, you should always prototype everything or you're wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just saying you're going to run into stuff like this if you didn't pattern and then prototype, because you're going off of a whim of being like, oh, maybe probably that I'm going to say the word crotch, but that's because that's, I think, the technical area that we're talking about, that pattern piece, the crotch gusset, like in a pair of pants. If you don't mock that up,
I was picturing a bag, and I was like, what part of the bag is called the crotch again? I don't remember that
the
far.
crotch of your backpack, okay? No, of like a pair of pants, because that's what I was thinking about with gussets. It's normally in a spot to like alleviate some seam pressure or to give extra space. If you were to prototype that and then try the pants on, then you would know. And by trying them on, you could then analyze that pattern piece and make it larger and narrowed, like get to what you want. Another thing you could do is start with a pair of pants that fit well, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you were thinking about it in terms of like gussets for pockets and stuff. So talk about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about like the packing cube or fanny packs. Like the fanny pack that I make all the time is like a front panel, back panel, and then a gusset, like a zipper gusset. It's just like the packing cube kit, if you want to picture that. That's the gusset I always get wrong. What I've learned, this just works for me. I don't know you well enough to say if this is exactly what you do. And if you do this, I'm sorry that I'm giving you monotonous information, but hopefully this helps somebody else. I write the math down exactly. Like I have to learn to trust the math. Earlier I said sometimes I just like make the seam allowance. My absolute go-to technique, and I know this now, which is why I'm starting to get better at getting the circumference correct, is I just always add more. I'm just like, it looks like it's probably 26 inches, and I'll probably do like a half-inch seam allowance. I'll just add an extra half inch just in case. That's obviously a surefire way of getting the circumference entirely wrong. The circumference isn't made up. It's a finite number. It's not a moving target. Like if you can measure, then I know exactly it's 32 inches. It's not going to become 33 when I start sewing. I don't know why I added. I just doubt myself. So I'll measure the circumference. I'll write that down. I'll write down as a reminder to myself, I am using a 1/4 inch seam allowance here, which means I need to add half an inch extra, and then I cut it at that inch or at that exact measurement. And I don't keep adding it. And then the other thing that I do to make sure is I clip it around before I do final stitches. I clip it to make sure it matches up correctly. If it looks really close, then I'm going to go for it. If it's off, then that when you're clipping. I used to not clip because I frankly just didn't want to know the answer if I got it wrong. So I just start sewing and I'd figure it out then. Obviously a surefire way of making sure your circumference is not right. But if it's too small or too big, I hate to sound this obvious, it's because your math's just wrong. And I get that. I say that as someone who consistently gets my math wrong.
Yeah.
So now I'm just whenever I do this, I just grab a scrap piece of paper and I write it out exactly it's basically reasoning with myself to be like, okay, trust the math that you get. This is true. Sometimes I have even asked Carter, I've been like, hey, does this math add up? Like, are you still good with this? Just to make sure that I'm not crazy. But yeah, if it's too short, it's just because the math isn't there.
So I design most, like for the packing cube kit, I design that on the computer. So when I created that shape, which it's like a rectangle with rounded corners, I knew the perimeter that I knew the liter size that I wanted. So since I knew the volume, I could then basically reverse that and say, okay, well, I want it to be about this size and I want it to be about this deep. But if you're using CAD, then you can just click on that perimeter once you've made it the size you want, and it just tells it to you.
Use a soft sided measuring tape, measure around. You can use cord and measure it around, then hold it up to a flat. There's a lot of ways that you can get that, like on paper patterns, which is what I'm doing. I'm not making any of my patterns in CAD right now. All of these are just paper patterns I have floating around the office.
Yeah, but thank you for the comment, Area 45, and please don't feel bad whenever it comes up short.
No.
I'm not trying to make a comment like that. I was just saying it happens to everybody, and I know it's frustrating, but try something like free Google SketchUp to to check yourself. Yeah, what else we got here?
All right, the next one is from Gretchen Swin. And their common construction mistake is not reading the instructions all the way through and skipping important steps.
Have you met our friend Jason?
I was about to say, maybe we should pause this and go get him so he can tell us why he does this all the time. This is common. We like to tease because Jason. The difference is
Jason's only done this once or twice, but now
no, he does it every
lives
time.
on.
Every single time he makes a kit.
Double down.
Well, the reason that I know is because the part that we get frustrated with is kind of too harsh, but where we're like, oh, come on, eye roll, is that he always comes to one of us after and he's like, hey, we need to reshoot this video. Like the customers it's not going to be clear to them that you need to sew this part. And then I go back and watch the video and there's like huge emboldened text that's like with an arrow, and then whoever's in the video says it, and then we show it. And I'm like, Jason, were you doing something else while you were sewing? He's like, well, I watched half the video and then I started. I'm like,
I knew the rest of the steps, so I just.
But that's we're poking fun at Jason, but that's a common thing, right? It's like you're excited, you want to get started. Watching a video can be boring if all you want to do is make your new like DCF roll top dry bag, and that can lead to stuff like this where you're like, okay, I see how it goes together. Well, maybe the next time you start, just fight your instinct and be like, no, I'm going to watch the whole video. And then what I like to do is after I watch the video, I then sew along with the video, right? That's the great thing about YouTube, Jason, is that you can pause it, you can fast forward, and you can rewind. So you can say, all right, step one, sew this part down. Watch them do it again, pause it, and then I sew that part down. And the reason why this happens is just because we're all impatient people.
This is the part of the episode where I'm going to make an Instagram reel. If you like to skip through the instructions and not pay attention or not read the whole thing, remember in school when your teacher would be like, hey, make sure you read the entire question before you fill out the answer on your quiz. If you're that person, let us know why you do that with sewing, because it's not school and it's not that lame. So pay attention to the instructions.
We've just got one more user question here. This one's from, I believe you say Casca and Phoenix and Kitties. And their common construction mistake is starting something without thinking it through and having to redo it.
Well, I told you that was common amongst all of us, and these comments they're different, but you can see that this just happens, right? It just happens when you're excited or you just want to get going, because nobody likes planning, right? Nobody likes doing homework. So yeah, the thing is, you just gotta, I think, force yourself to do it. The reason I do it is because I don't want to. I'm lazy. I don't want to have to redo it. I don't want to get 75% through the project and realize that I forgot a critical part and have to restart. And to me, the fear of doing that is so high that I'm like, all right, I'm going to force myself to take my time at the beginning. And Jason, I think, has started doing that as well. And now he watches the whole video.
I honestly just started planning more like late last year, this year. So if this is something you haven't been doing, don't feel like you're behind the ball or you're not as good of a maker or anything. Like I literally just started doing this myself because I really just, for so long, I just wanted to sew for the experience. And it's something that I did in between like long, hard meetings or when I wanted to sort of just give myself a time to chill. I didn't want to do extensive planning and thinking. I got to the point though where I really wanted to make more complex items, and I could only perform those items if I really planned it out. Something that I really like about making, or what making has done for me. And if this is not where you're at, that's totally cool. I don't want to make this into a more serious thing than it is, but it sort of taught me things about myself. I think some mindfulness in making is pretty cool, but also really important. That like I know I want to rush into things and I just want to do it. Carter knows this all too well. That like I get a new thing and I'm the type of person like gets new shoes and I wear them like before I get home from the store, and then I wear them to sleep that night, and like that kind of idea. So especially when I start making something, I want to finish that thing that day, even if it took me 20 hours straight. Having that mindfulness for me has been really nice where I've started, like I have a specific graded notebook that I sketch all my things out in first, and I make sure I have dimensions. I sleep on it overnight. Like I kind of have a process now, even down to, this is a tip that Dan gave us, but I'd recommend for everybody: write out your construction, your order of construction or order of operations for the project. You'll start to see holes in, like things that you would have made mistakes doing. Practice some mindfulness as you're doing this. Not only is it really enlightening for yourself, but you will get to make more complex and more exciting pieces. And every project that you make has a piece of pride, but when you do something that you are really proud of, and there aren't those little mistakes, you're like, I wish I'd done that differently, and if I spent 5 minutes I would have done it better. It is pretty cool to reach that place. There's absolutely no shade if you don't want to be that. If you don't want to do that, I get it. I still make stuff, I still sew things where I'm like, mess that part up, and it's still okay. But if you can if you want to do sewing in that way, then it is really cool to like really lay it out. And that's where I've started to recognize, like, like I think I'm actually kind of a decent maker sometimes. I just needed to spend a bit more time. I needed to map it out. I needed to sketch it on Keynote, draw it in my notebook, do some research, choose the right colors, like really be intentional about it. I had some cool, so when I started to make stuff that I was really proud of, instead of being like, this is good, but it could have been better. And these are things that I knew I just didn't feel like spending the time doing.
So if you wondered what type of person I am compared to Jameson, I have no idea what he's talking about. I normally sew, and the only thing that's in my mind are cuss words until it's over, and then cuss words because I'm happy that it's over. Just kidding. That all that stuff is true for me too, just maybe in a slightly different way because I'm not that good at talking. But yeah, that was fun. Thank you guys for sending stuff in. Thank you for making mistakes so that we have topics to talk about. And hopefully you got some insights on what you can do better from the beginning if you're just starting out, and maybe a refresh if you are an experienced maker, but you've been frustrated recently and it's causing you to not want to go back to the machine.
Yeah. Go check out new things. I think the only way that we get better is by messing it up. So try new projects, have fun with it, and let us know what you think. Thanks for listening.